You push the button on.
Oh, thank you.
Former city council member.
Yes, when I was on, it was the thing was always on unless you push the button to turn it off.
Okay.
My name is Esther Pat, and I'm here representing the Champaign-Urbana Tenant Union.
My name is Kathy Wallach, and I am here as part of SUNA, the Southeast Urbana Neighborhood Association.
I'm Teresa Michelson, and I'm also one of the coordinators of the Southeast Urbana Neighborhood Association.
My name is James Moreland. I'm representing Lehrman Neighborhood Action Committee.
I'm Marianne Downey. I'm with the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association.
Okay, so I have one little slip for public participation. Robin Arbiter, who is the founder of the Lehrman Neighborhood Association, so we're glad to see you. And Diane Marlin will be next, who is one of the original members of the Neighborhood Safety Task Force.
Hi, my name is Robin Arbiter. I live at 109 West Illinois Street in Urbana. 01. I'm no longer in the Lehrman neighborhood. However, I remain concerned about the issues there. And I came to listen, but I did want to just share some thoughts briefly. And one is that with this impressive array of resources that have been gathered by the city in terms of the ordinance and the officers dedicated to the neighborhood watch program and city staff assigned to the neighborhood associations and all the kind of things that have been brought. I'm still baffled by why Aspen Court and the Lehrman neighborhood are in the situation that they're in physically. Even in the last 2 days, I have just heard all kinds of complaints about conditions there. And so safety, it seems sometimes that the safety level or the safety concerns rise to a level of concern to people when, the bullets start flying or there's a huge fight, or which is what precipitated us into the Lehrman Neighborhood Action Committee into the focus of the community when we'd been functioning beforehand and saying, we have 35 student fights happening on the streets almost every day. It wasn't until you hit 70 students fighting in the streets that somehow that gained attention. So now, we have bullets flying all over the place over there. I mean, it's down to a roar, a low. We haven't had anything like that for a few weeks, so yay us. But why do things have to get to that point when we have the physical evidence of I'm just going to call it slumlordship, out on view for everyone to see? And not only that, even if you didn't want to just look at Aspen Court, when we have a pocket of a neighborhood that was once a viable place for people who needed affordable housing, did not have Section 8 vouchers, but could find, a credit-free, credit check-free place that they could live on a minimum wage, less than full-time income, how come that pocket of a neighborhood that had 269 units and is down to 116 in a decade, how come we've gotten to this point? And I know we can all easily say, well, the housing bubble and this person and this trend or whatever, but the fact is that for people who stayed in the neighborhood, conditions are just awful. And they radiate beyond just that part of the rental neighborhood where there's concentration of people in multifamily housing. Those issues kind of are radiating out to the rental experience in the streets around that neighborhood as well. So then now we have this huge turnover of people, which I'm trying to find a way to say in real terms. We have people unable to stay housed in the neighborhood in the rental units. And this last school year, we had an unprecedented number of students getting bused to their home school, Preston Williams Elementary School, from back and forth from Champaign, where their families had finally ended up. I mean, like they were sending an entire busload of kids. And Yvonne Smith was telling me at the beginning of the school year that they had never seen something like that in the history of the school. I mean, of her tenure at the school. I shouldn't maybe exaggerate. But that's a very big deal. So it suggests that conditions there are bad at the best of times, even when we don't have, this other issue with crime. I'm sorry, was that 1 minute or I'm done?
Okay. 1 minute left. We try to have people talk for 5 minutes.
I knew
So
that. And
go
I just
ahead.
Brought no time. I brought no way to stop myself. So, anyway, I guess just I'm glad the task force is meeting. I'd like to think about safety in some different terms. I appreciate all the tools that are brought to bear, and all of these things that I read about are ways really to hold managers, slumlords, accountable for their atrocious practices. And I think we should keep doing that, and doing that probably more assertively if possible. But there are other levels and experiences of safety that aren't really even getting addressed at all. And those are those things that, for the 10 years that I've been looking at safety issues in the neighborhood, those are those things. There are a number of things missing in the neighborhood, sort of partly in terms of building, but in terms of social infrastructure and building, that don't allow people the resources they need to manage their stuff. And so a lot of our safety calls are for interpersonal things that people don't know how to resolve, or they resolve poorly, or mental health. I mean, they're all the things you would expect, and they're more social servicey. And we still don't have a single place within the neighborhood to hold a meeting for neighbors to take care of themselves in a group sense. And it's not a neighborhood like in most of the other neighborhoods where somebody can call a community meeting and host 40 people in their house or 20 people in their house. It's very hard to do that in small rental housing.
Have you tried the schools to see if you could have a meeting at the schools? I think there was a meeting at the church. We've gone to several meetings there.
So we have explored different partnerships over the years, and what looks most viable to me at this time, although I'm not a leader of the LNEC organization.
You're the founder, however, so thank you for that.
Okay, yeah. So they can take my suggestions or not. But I think they probably could arrange some kind of cooperation with the Park District for meeting space at the district's offices at Brookins. But other than that, things haven't really worked out at the school in terms of meeting spaces for a variety of reasons. The church has not been a great, it has not been an appropriate partner for us for kind of staffing reasons.
Did the Neighborhood Watch, did that take hold at all or not?
The Neighborhood Watch, there is a
a
Neighborhood
group of
Watch,
people.
but that is not within our.
I mean, that's supposed to be dealing with problems that people see and trying to look out for each other. So I wondered if that has something that was positive.
People who are in the streets at the Country Squire has a Neighborhood Watch, and they can probably speak to how effective that is in their area. But we're talking about the area from Rainbow View, maybe Rainbow View West. And while I think there's some discussion about a Neighborhood Watch, I don't think that really gets at the heart of the things that people need. And at the next meeting, I would like to be a little more organized and bring some of those things.
Yeah, I would like a list and
And I will
your
happily-
suggestions.
I will happily
Well,
provide that.
we're going to try to meet next month, so it will be, I believe, on the 17th.
So really, I just
Yeah,
wanted
so
to.
if you want to just write something up, then we can discuss them
So
individually.
I will do that. And I just
Okay.
wanted to raise the issue that there are safety issues. I mean, safety is not just the thing that people become concerned about when bullets start flying. It's like the day-to-day experience that people are having in the neighborhood, feeling unsafe in their homes for a variety of reasons, and also then exacerbated or in some ways imposed on them from the conditions of their tenancy.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Esther.
Just one quick question, Robin. At the Champaign-Urbana Tenant Union, we've gotten a number of calls in the last 2 months from Aspen Court tenants about property maintenance issues. Mainly it's been mold. And I'm just wondering, what have you been hearing? I know you're not living there anymore, so I don't know if you're hearing as much, but since you mentioned this and talking about the
No, I get
slum
at least
landlord
2 phone
conditions.
calls a week from my neighbors there.
And so what did they complain to you about at Aspen Court? With regard to the property
The
maintenance.
property,
yeah.
well, right now, the lack of ice removal. I mean, people are sort of grimly joking that if they fall, that they'll get a little money from Green Street. I mean, it's just absurd and ludicrous that people are having trouble getting in and out of the complex. And I didn't just hear that from tenants. I heard that from a driver who was in there today. So it's always, this goes well before Green Street's management of it, but the experience of weather at Aspen Court is always like a week longer than everybody else's experience. So I used to think I was snowed in, and I would thought that all of Urbana was snowed in, and then one day I looked out my back window and saw that life had gone on Philo Road. Just Aspen Court was snowed in. But the complaints of mold have been, I mean, the complaint is the leaks and the roofing, and the only way that people have gotten that addressed is to go apart unit by unit, you know. And you can imagine what it takes for a tenant to kind of step forward and demand that, because tenants have a lot of fear about asking for big things. So they ask for a repair, and if it doesn't happen, they'll sit on that for a long time, and the leak gets worse and worse. So there have been people with like a waterfall over their front door inside the house, you know, watermarks 3 feet down from the ceiling, and this is the part that I was asking when I started my comment is, you know, we have city staff who come to our meetings. We have informal conversations with people. I call building inspectors and tell them, and I call you and I say, neighbor has a rodent, landlord's going to bill her $300, or, you know, whatever it is. Or I think the pest thing is, the bed bug thing is $300 or something. Or there's a rodent and the landlord says you have to do it and the person's in a wheelchair. I mean, so the response is just sometimes not there, and the tenant has to sort of keep advancing through their fear of losing the only affordable housing they know they can get, or they don't know who to call at the city. And until they stumble across someone who can direct them, and who's willing, you know, to help them persist in the process, that their issues don't get addressed. So there was a rodent in an apartment that I'm aware of for several months. You know, there's been a bed bug cascade, you know, and it doesn't get dealt with like definitively. And the landlord, the management's attitude is often like, this is a tenant-based problem.
Okay.
And when I compare that to issues like on campus, and how those issues in housing are talked about, I think we're sort of like blaming people for being poor, and we are always hearing as tenants that we are the problem. And meanwhile, on campus, to raise some horror issues there, I've known of students who have frozen urine and hockey pucked it in petri dishes, hockey pucked a mold made a petri dish under a neighbor's door that they didn't like, and you know, into a carpeted apartment. And I've heard of, you know, tenants parking their motorcycles for the winter in apartments, and those things are not uncommon. Well, okay, the hockey puck thing is a little less common, but you know,
we should probably move on. But thank you very much, and I welcome you to come back next month
I will happily do
and have
so.
some. We'll try to
And I'll
see
have
what
that.
specific things we could work on.
I will have that.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, Diane.
Thank you. I'm Diane Marlin. I'm on the Urbana City Council, and I'm a former member of the task force. I wanted to, first of all, thank staff for scheduling a meeting in January with the owners and managers of a number of the apartment buildings on Vawter Street. They'd been in contact, in the 2000 block of Vawter, they'd been in contact with me back in November out of a concern about the recent shootings and increase in violence, and so I worked with them to get a meeting set up with police and community development to talk about specific and extra security measures that they could take. And they're very, very anxious to work with the city because they're just as concerned about the violence as anybody else. So that'll take place on January 12th. The other thing I wanted to comment on tonight is the crime statistics that have been supplied to the task force and before that to the city council. A couple months ago, the city council was told that serious crime was down 70% in Urbana. And more recently, in the packet you got today, you were told the packet said it was down 49%. And several of us on the city council, when we saw these numbers, the first reaction was that's an astonishing decline. And normally, when you're looking at trend data, over 10 years or something, if you have that dramatic of a change, the first question you ask is, why, and is it real? So several of us went back and actually looked at the Illinois Uniform Crime Reporting Program data that's run by the Illinois State Police. And I think it's important for these kinds of statistics to be used accurately. There's a decrease in the crime as reported to the Illinois State Police. And the statistic isn't necessarily reality in Urbana. And what I mean by that is back in 2009, the state police changed the definition for 8 different categories of crime, including things like aggravated assault and battery. They also changed the numbers of the types of crimes that actually had to be reported to the state police. So when we see a decrease in crime, what we really should be saying is there's a decrease in the crime reported to the state police. What's most telling, if you go back and look at the data, for example, aggravated assaults per 100,000 in Urbana in 2009 was 673. In 2010, it went to 208. That was the year that they changed what was reported to the state police. As a result, the violent crime rate in Urbana went from 836 to 444 per 100,000. Again, it's a reflection of a change in definition and what's actually reported to the state police, not necessarily what's happening out on the streets. And in the supporting documents, again, supplied by the state police, they state, and I quote, statistics are expected to decrease based on definition alone. So we need to be very careful with these claims of a decrease in crime. We need to be saying, well, there's a decrease in what's reported to the state police, but not necessarily what's happening on the streets in Urbana. And I think it's, we just need to be very accurate in what we're telling the public. Because I got calls from people who said, well, 70% decrease in crime, it's not in my neighborhood, and it really isn't. It's what's being reported to the state police.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Richard Balsbo?
Thank you for allowing me to address you. I live on Scoville Circle, which is Ward 7. And have only lived there for about a year and a half, come from Champaign after 13 years, felt that was a good neighborhood. And I have to tell you, both my wife and I are very concerned about the crime situation in Ward 7 and in that area. I thought we were coming into an area that was families and neighborhoods that we could live in, but with some of the violence we've seen, we're kind of concerned. So I'm pretty much in support, and my wife is as well, of additional police officers. I know there's a budget issue with that. If you need any help trying to find money for that, I'd be open to talking about that, because I think it's something that's pretty much needed. The other thing, it's needed now. I know there's been discussions about mental health, that we need to fix that. We need to help fix poverty. But those things are long-term. Poverty war has been going on since 1964. It's been up and down, seesawing. Violent crime has gone up and down, so it's no correlation to poverty. Can't speak to the mental health side of things, but those are things that need to be fixed but can't be fixed quickly, where I think the violence that we have now needs to be fixed. Second thing, we need to hold these landlords responsible for their properties. I would look for some way to be able to require them to put in surveillance cameras so that when there is crime, we can figure out who that is. And it will force some of these people that think that there's a crime that they can be that they can be seen on camera probably won't commit it. So I think that's something that needs to be stressed to them and monitored by someone within the city or the council or whatever it is to make sure that they are keeping up with their surveillance cameras. And then the last thing is, I've seen too many of these situations where people actually have 4, 5, and 6 times have gone to court on these things and then are still on the streets. In my opinion, if they're caught after they've had some violence, especially some gun or some major violent crime, should be in jail. And I think we need to put these people in prison and not slap them on the wrist. That's happened quite often here recently. We're getting too PC about these things, and I think we need to get a little more diligent as far as actual prison terms. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to just review what we have done. This task force was formed in 2005, and over the past 11 years, according to the most recent statistics I got from the police department, we have cut the violent crime rate in Urbana in half. And certainly we could, make sure those numbers are correct, but I think that it's pretty unusual to have that much of a decrease. And there are pockets in the city where people are perceiving problems, so we obviously have to deal with it. What we realized starting this task force was that poor property management was the #1 problem, and we did 2 ordinances that were vetted by this committee. And the first one was rental registration. That requires all the rental property in Urbana to be registered with the city. So it is inspected on a regular basis. And then the other item was the aggravated public nuisance ordinance, which the police department bases on the number of crimes that are reported. And they usually go talk to the owner and say that we could impose this ordinance. There are a number of things that would happen, but usually they can get the owner to comply with the safety program. And so it's been unusual to actually have to apply the ordinance, because when the police department goes and talks to the owners, we usually get very good compliance. We have other tools that we use, building inspection. Some of it's done by the fire department, and others are done by our building inspectors at community development. We have nuisance abatement, which is done by the Public Works Department, and liquor license standards. That's done through the mayor's office and the legal department. And every week, I meet with the Problem Properties Committee, and we have police, fire, community development, legal, and public works all discussing issues. And I think that it is that coordination that has enabled us to cut the crime significantly and prevent crime. So we have reports from the various departments on what they've actually done. The police department and the legal department are here, and community development. So if you have any questions about what they are doing, the point of this was just to let you know that this is not just something that happens from time to time. This is an ongoing work of the city. And the fact that the departments are talking to each other and working together is very helpful. Recently, we've had an outbreak of gang-related shootings, and so that's why I asked for 5 more police officers. I called the police chief after the last one and said, looks like we have a shooting war going on. How many new officers would you need? And he told me 5. And originally I was going to see for maybe 3 this year and 2 next year, but I'm going to report to the city council on how we could finance this in January. And, to do something in the middle of the year, some council members are concerned about that, but I think there is no cost-free solution to this. If we don't do anything, there is a cost to that. The universal response is usually do nothing. That's the most popular response in the world, but doing nothing costs as well as doing something. So you have to have a trade-off there. So that's one thing I would like you to respond to me. over the next month, talk to the people in your neighborhood about how they feel about getting more police or what other things could be done. And obviously, we have a long-term issue, but there's also the immediate issue, and the last gentleman that spoke was referring to that. So, does anybody on the committee have questions for the police department or community development or any of the other? Yes, Teresa.
I just have a question here since we had Robin talked about the Aspen Court issue. So this is on page 30 of what we got. It's page 2 of a report from CD, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So this is preparation of redevelopment plan for Aspen Court Apartments, including extensive renovations to be completed in 2017. I mean, it just seems, I used to be on the City Development Commission. I've been off for about 4 or 5 years. I mean, it seems like that property, and Chris Saunders, is he not the owner of Aspen Court or the manager?
Right, but it's for sale.
Right.
So is there anyone from CD who would like to talk about Aspen Court and what the city's been working on?
Guess it's
Libby Tyler is here.
Yes, Aspen Court is probably our number one property of concern that needs to be improved in a dramatic fashion. We've been working on this for a few years. We did work with another developer and the Housing Authority. That agreement wasn't able to proceed. However, there's another affordable housing developer, TWG Development out of Indianapolis, that has a purchase contract with Aspen Court. It will be due to be executed next month, and they have already applied to the Illinois Housing Development Authority for 9% tax credits for a complete remodeling of Aspen Court. It's going to need a major infusion of many millions of dollars to bring the property back to safe, decent housing. It's important family housing. It has associated with it HUD vouchers that are based on the project. Those vouchers are no longer available, so there's an income stream, and there's a HUD requirements as well that need to be met. So tonight, later tonight, tomorrow morning, it will be posted by IDA, the successful recipients of that early round of the 9%, and whether they can proceed to actually compete for the tax credits. Speaking with the developer, however, they will proceed even with the non-competitive tax credits, which are 4%. So that gives us a good guarantee that they will infuse cash into the project, which is what that property really needs. So if you're interested in the developer, they actually came to visit Urbana because they were interested in the property to the north of the city building. It's TWG Development in Indianapolis, and they are their primary focus is affordable housing, and they're extremely experienced in turnaround properties. So we're very hopeful in 2017. It's been in a bad position of this transition of the ownership, and I think bringing it into the ownership of a developer and manager who actually knows how to deal with affordable housing will be very important. So thanks for asking, Teresa.
But the bottom line sort of is, because that's imminent, that nothing, I mean, the owner, Chris Saunders, his feet can't be held to the fire. I mean, people are just going to continue to suffer in that situation until this whole thing comes to fruition.
I think at our next meeting, hopefully that will all be executed. So we're very far along. I know he has his own story to tell about the last few years in the property, but we are really focused on getting it moved along and getting the renovation. And if it's not renovated, then it will just have to be demolished, and that can be very expensive as well.
Okay, another question for Libby?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is in your domain. Hoarding, is that your area, or is that problem
We all
properties?
work on that one. So.
Yeah, well, so I noticed there's a reference to hoarding in the report, and that a situation with hoarding was ameliorated. But in our neighborhood, there is a serious hoarding issue, and I wonder, how does that get addressed? do you wait for neighbors, adjacent neighbors to complain, or do you, I mean, how is it dealt with? Because this has gone on for a long, long time.
I think that, neighbors who care will let us know, and that can be anonymous because it is a very sensitive subject, and people feel a lot of shame and conflict about that. So sometimes we do hear about that from caring neighbors, or sometimes it's a parent from the street. Oftentimes it's not. Sometimes we hear about it, though, sadly, when the fire department has a medical call or there's a fire, and then they observe that there's unsafe living conditions there. And then we do have all the departments working together with the mayor's leadership on, there's a social work aspect, so we do coordinate with other agencies. There's the fire safety, of course. There's police, because there's personal safety, and then property maintenance, which is our building codes, and then the nuisance codes, which have to do primarily with the exterior of the property. We have been working on a situation. We've made tremendous progress, but it's taken a lot of time, and that's in West Urbana as well, and that's something that was visible from the exterior of the property.
Might be the same one, yeah. Okay, well, I don't know I'm not sure what I've learned from this response.
But
guess
if you could, if you wanted to
mention it
make
again,
a kind of a confidential inquiry, then we might be able to provide you more information. There's privacy issues as well, and occasionally there would need to be indications that a search warrant would be needed, and that's when we really get into the legal expertise that we have with Michelle Brooks. So.
Yeah, when it's inside, when it's internal, that's one thing, but when it's on the porch out onto the street, I would think that would be a much...
We have more tools at our disposal there.
Okay, thanks.
Esther?
Just along those lines, Libby, for anything, I mean, whether the person's a hoarder or not, if people have junk on their yard, or on the porch, people can just call in a nuisance complaint, right? I mean, they can just say there's blight and junk, whatever, at such a, I'll say my address, whatever, XYZ, such and such a street, and then someone goes out. I mean, I thought those go for the external ones, though, that goes to Public Works. Is that right?
Yes, Jason Airdsmith's our nuisance
Right, okay.
inspector. Often our housing inspectors will get complaints, and there might be some property maintenance in addition to the nuisance, so they work together. But the things that Mr. Airdsmith looks for would be junk and debris, overgrown weeds,
Right.
things of that nature. But oftentimes you'll see both the maintenance and the nuisance at the same locale, and we again will intake the complaints, and we do have good tools at our disposal. Jason issues a notice pretty much right away. If it's not corrected in short order, then he has the ability to actually do the cleanup, and then sometimes the property gets liened, and again, many times these situations happen because of family situations or health situations. There's lots of different reasons why you might see that other than intentional neglect.
Okay. And if somebody isn't sure who to call, if they call community development and it's one that's supposed to go to Public Works, you folks just refer them, so they should just call you. if
Send
they're
it right
unsure. Okay.
over, and there's an immediate response.
Thanks. One last question. Are the people of Aspen Court going to have to move out for this renovation? I mean, I know the majority of the people are going to become displaced because the new owner, after they fix up, is going to make the rent unaffordable except for those HUD units. But are they going to have to go for the work to be done, or do you know?
They shouldn't have to because they're going to do phased renovations.
Okay.
But they might have to move unit while their unit's getting renovated. But they should be able to stay there. And there are voucher holders who I'm sure would be interested in staying there. So it would be a little, it would be a bit of a renovation zone there for several months, but ultimately they would have completely redone unit.
If the mold and the rodents are gone, I think more people would want to stay. But
Absolutely.
I suspect the rent will be raised beyond their ability to pay.
Well, they would still have those controlled units under HUD.
Right.
So
I know they
those will
keep talking about
remain,
that
and
to
that's-
distract from the rest. There's about 90 that are not, though, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. There's 48, I think, that are HUD controlled. Those will continue. And then if they do get the tax credits, they will have income limitations on the others, but it won't be quite as low. Not all will be low. So it'll be a mix, which is usually how these fundings are provided, that you have a mix of income is a goal rather than the concentration of poverty.
Okay, Chris Storr has a question for you.
Hi, Chris.
Thank you. It happens that a couple of months ago I was in some apartments in our neighborhood, and I noticed that some of them were in very, very poor condition, and I happened to meet somebody moving into an apartment that I thought I would not really want to move into. And you know, when does the rental, is there regular inspections of the apartment houses? And is it like, between renters or on an annual basis? How frequent does that happen?
So it's done systematically by zone. Throughout the city, we have 9,600 apartment units. So it can take a long time to completely inspect all of them. However, we do go back in when we have complaints, either tenant complaints or neighborhood complaints. When we take note of activity, a lot of concern on a property, fire, things like that, we'll go back in. And again, you could certainly, you're welcome. Any resident, any neighbor is welcome to say, we're concerned about this property. Please take a look. We can look in our records and see when was that inspected last time, what was the classification. We score each inspection. Did that indicate more frequent inspections? We'll go out right away and do the street view, and then we can actually strategically go back in sooner than we might have otherwise. So we really are relying on this advisory group and the neighbors and the neighborhood groups to let us know. We don't have a lot of time to drive around and do the windshield. So we would welcome those suggestions. The other thing is that we do require compliance to minimum code standards. So it may not be to the level that would suit what you would want to see in an apartment. So some of those things, they're technically meeting code, but they may not be quite as nice as an individual might wish for. So we do have some limits, but most of the time I do have to say when we go in to inspect, we find quite a few things that need to be repaired.
Okay, James Moreland has a question.
For you. Yes. This TW developer, if the sale goes through, will they be able, like people who live like next door to Aspen Court, give them suggestions or talk to them about how they're going to do it, or a suggestion how they're going to develop it? Like people ask questions about their renovations and stuff?
They will engage with LNAC and with the neighbors, and I think they look forward to that. We're very impressed with their planning capabilities of the company, and I think that they would welcome suggestions. We've already conveyed some of the earlier suggestions to them. We know that the neighborhood was really interested in connecting Aspen Court with Philo Road to facilitate pedestrian access and as a convenience to the neighborhood, and they've already made some inquiries as to how they can get that done, and I think they would really appreciate the neighborhood input on what types of amenities they might provide in terms of playground, commons area, the other things that they might have available for the residents there as well as the neighborhood residents.
Anyone else have a question for Libby? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Libby.
Hi.
Am I correct, the multiple unit housing owners are not required to have surveillance cameras on their properties?
We can require surveillance as part of an aggravated nuisance security plan. And as the mayor mentioned, usually we just need to say that they've made the criteria for that, which is can be a pretty low bar of repeated crime. Our police and and they can speak further to this, Mr. Sanders is here, but they suggest security improvements that could very well include camera. In fact, that's a very common suggestion. Security of doors. There are a lot of things that can be done to the physical premise as well as to the management and operation of the premise to improve the safety. And I'm sure the police could talk about their success in these preventive security plans that they've offered.
Okay, since surveillance cameras are somewhat of a deterrent, why do we have that in our ordinance, the nuisance landlord ordinance? I mean, why would it be more effective to pull that out of the ordinance and just make that a requirement in general for anyone having more than X amount of units in his property, given where we are now? Why do we have to wait?
Maybe we should have Joel Sanders talk about this, because we're not requiring anybody to wait. We tell them when they need a safety plan, and they have to install the cameras right then.
Okay, but we are, by waiting, by telling them that they need to have a safety plan, we are waiting. Am I misunderstanding this? Why not just the cost of doing business as a landlord, you have to have surveillance cameras?
As the police department, we would love for everybody to have surveillance cameras. You're right. Somebody made the comment that surveillance cameras deter crime. The problem we get into and needs a lot of conversation, some significant research, is once the government starts saying you have to have this, and then you have to make that available to the government, there's likely some constitutional issues in there, just because you've had no problems here, but now we're making you do this. What the department would rather see is working with landlords to try and get a voluntary cooperation so that we can cooperate with them, so that we can have access to what's going on. We've got some property owners down in the Vaudar area who have voluntarily put in cameras, and we have free access to those. We can see what's going on, and we work really well with them. And what we don't want to see is if the city orders you have to put those in, then we have to start looking at the conversation of, can we legally order them without a warrant or without anything else to give us access to those cameras. So it's a fine line we need to walk, and we need to have this conversation. But just outright requiring them, we can do it under the nuisance because they've had all these problems, so we're trying to solve a problem. But going to an apartment complex that's not had a problem and then ordering them to put in cameras, I'm not sure that we can do that.
Okay. Have things settled down at Vaudar and Silver? I read the crime reports every day, and it seems like Harding is almost more of a problem right now than Silver Vaudar is a problem. Is this what you're finding?
I think it would depend upon how you define a problem.
Police response.
We, without stats in front of me, I am not comfortable giving exactly what's going on. I can tell you that the shootings, the shots fired calls, the blatant acts of violence, we've not responded to the Vaudar area, Silver Vaudar, for a while. One of the individuals who was actively shooting currently has a warrant for his arrest, and so he's not real anxious to get back down in there. So that has backed off. This time of the year, anywhere you go, you're going to be getting the package thefts, you're going to be getting the car burglaries. So are those still continuing down there? Yes.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, James Moreland has a question for you.
Yes. I got two questions.
Sure.
Who's responsible for the security cameras to keep it upkeep? And what's the penalty if they don't keep it running?
Okay, currently, whoever owns the camera is responsible for the upkeep. Again, if the city gets into ordering you to do that, I don't know that we want to pay for those. Cameras are, when you picture security cameras and security cameras that are usable, that are beneficial, they're not like a GoPro, they're not like something that you're just going to go to Kmart or Walmart and buy. They're extremely expensive to install and to maintain. So whoever owns those is responsible for maintaining those. If the city requires you to put those in, and there's been a couple apartment complexes where that's been required, the owner still is required to maintain those. And if we view those and see they're not working, then that's when it gets further addressed.
Chris Storr.
How long do they keep tapes or of that, and is there a resolution requirement?
Again, that's under the nuisance ordinance, under just a general. If I own a camera, it's up to me how long I keep the tape. It's again depends on what the system you have, depends on how you're storing that. If you're storing it digitally, which is I'm guessing, don't hold me to this, about 99% of the camera systems today are going to hold data digitally. That starts to get very expensive if you hold that data very long. So if it's under the nuisance ordinance, we can require you to hold it. I believe we go up to 30 days.
Is 30 days enough?
I would think so.
Okay.
I mean, any violent crime is going to get reported within 30 days.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. And Michelle Brooks, would you like to answer questions from the legal standpoint, or just describe some of the things that you've done? Some of the judgments you've gotten?
Hi, I'm Michelle Brooks. I'm an assistant city attorney, and I've worked with the city since 2000.
You need to be close to the microphone.
I'm not sure you all want that, but okay. Be careful what you ask for. I'm an assistant city attorney. I've worked with the city since 2009, and within the first 2 years of my working with the city, one of the things I worked on was the aggravated public nuisance ordinance. So I've pretty much been involved with every case we've had, whether we've worked with property owners formally or informally, since that started. My boss, the city attorney, handles the aspects of liquor license compliance, so I won't really speak to those today, but I can try to answer questions about housing, building code. I work with community development on that, and any questions you might have under the aggravated public nuisance ordinance. I also would work with public works in terms of any of the nuisance abatements on exterior of houses as well.
Okay, so we've had some difficult landlords, and we've had to go to court.
Correct.
You did get a very large judgment from one of the landlords.
Yes, and that was related to a building safety issue. When we get building safety issues coming in, they'll start through the channel of going through the community development. Community development will be alerted. I invite Libby Tyler to correct me if I misspeak on any part of this process, but then there'll be an inspection, and if a violation or violations are detected, a notice of violation is issued, and then under either our adopting ordinance or the International Property Maintenance Code or the Building Code, a timeline is given depending on the severity of the violation to correct that. If it's not corrected, then a ticket can be issued and a fine can be assessed. Alternatively, it's possible to pursue remedy through court, asking the court to order compliance, or in some circumstances you can do both. So we had a situation where on 3 properties that were built virtually identically and owned by the same building property owner and managed by their own management company, there were 3 balconies, exterior balconies, that were deemed to be very unsound and unsafe. And the landlord was given every opportunity to try and bring those into compliance. The city worked very hard with him to try and get that done, because the effect of setting an absolute deadline and him not complying, the property owner not complying, could have resulted in the building being condemned and people having to be relocated. So there were efforts by the city to do everything we could to not get to that point. Unfortunately, due to the reticence of the property owner not to make timely repairs, that's exactly what had to happen. The buildings had to be condemned and the tenants had to be evacuated in February. Not a great time, obviously, for anyone. So again, an extended period of time went on as the property owner began to make some efforts and would make just enough to say that he was moving forward, and then efforts, ultimately ceased. So we filed a case and we took it to the circuit court, and there was somewhat of a lengthy hearing on that. But the judge in that case did determine that there were multiple violations of the property maintenance code and our own city code, and awarded a pretty significant fine for 3 different time periods in that. Now, the property owner has appealed that ruling, and it is pending before the appellate court, so I won't go into too many of the legal details of that. But the judges here do take these things very seriously, and this particular judge was a judge who had heard a case up in Rantoul, where there was, several years ago, there was very significant sewer, wastewater out on properties. And so this judge has a history of taking these things very seriously. And as I think all the judges over there do, we try to avoid going that route and getting cooperation where we can, because the impact to tenants. We try to work with these property owners, and the court process is a very long one. It was from the filing of the complaint in the case I was just discussing that the city was involved in to the actual ruling, it was over a year. So obviously we want to try to get compliance through other mechanisms, but sometimes we have to go both routes.
Okay, any questions for Michelle? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to see, we have this challenge of gun violence, which I want to talk about, have maybe the people on this task force talk with the people in your neighborhood about what they think about hiring more police, or if they have other ideas on how to deal with this. But would you like to each report on what your neighbors are concerned about at this point? We just go around, everybody give a little report, short.
Sure. In the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association, we pretty much kind of thought this was a nice neighborhood, not really anything too terribly upsetting. But this past fall, after Halloween, a week or so after Halloween, there was a shooting, and my understanding was 24 shell casings were found on the scene because of gunplay in front of one of the neighbors' homes, or on Grove Street, and it was pretty upsetting. It has been so upsetting for the neighbors that we've been meeting on occasion and to try to determine what sort of response that we'd like to try to do about this.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add?
At this point in time, I think there are more questions than there are answers for everyone. But one of the questions that I have, I think some of my neighbors have, is what would the police department plan to do with those 5 additional police? That's an interesting number. I'm sure there's some logic and reason behind the 5 officers coming on board, and what sort of the game plan is would be very helpful to know.
The police chief gave a report to the city council, so I'll get that to you. But basically, what they said was that the current staff is not big enough to deal with the problems that we have right now, and it's causing a lot of stress with the officers. We have, this historically has been a pretty safe city, and we have fewer police officers per capita than many other areas. We do have cooperation between the Urbana Police and the University of Illinois Police, the Champaign Police, and the Sheriff's Department. But basically, we're at a point now where we need to add more officers. Did you want to talk about, yeah.
Where I live near Lehrman, near Aspen Court, where all the shootings, where all the shootings happened. I'm the president of LNAC, and we talked about it, and I guess the neighborhood is sort of worried about, like, not enough policemen not going around their same routine,
Just on patrol?
Unpatrolled. Not a lot there in Aspen Court, and they figure out how their schedule is that way. They know when they come around, they don't stagger it. So, plus I'm going to be talking to LNEC when our next meeting. So,
okay.
they I'll be talking to them about the new policemen and everything else.
All right, thank you. Suna.
Kathy's going to talk about sort of the neighborhood perception, and I only want to say that it seems to me that the police department has been understaffed for years. I was always aware of the numbers, like Champaign has this many, we're this proportional size, and we have this many. I think there was a letter from a police officer in the News Gazette within the past year who talked about not having enough police on the streets at certain times. So, I think it's great we're thinking about this now, but I really, really wish that we had thought about this 6 years ago, because to go around saying, our crime is lower than Champaign, well, that's good enough, but the police, I think, did an admirable job with very limited amount of staff. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to get into the discussion of hiring more, but I would just say I've thought for years that we've been understaffed. And it's interesting that it's good we're doing it now. But
First of all, I want to commend the Urbana Police Department. When things started to evolve into what they are today at Silver Water, they responded immediately with extra patrols, paying overtime. With the recent violence, they've been really good about additional patrol in the area. My concern extends to the rest of the city. When police officers are responding to specific areas of crime like Learman, Aspen Court, Silver Water, they're shortchanging other parts of the city. I started working at the Urbana Police Department in 1986, and I started working at MCAD in 1989. The city of Urbana was always short-staffed on police officers. That's the way they've always functioned. And they've always been asked to do more with less, and that has to stop, because we're not going to retain good, qualified people in the job by putting them under the stress that we make them deal with daily. They take it home, it ends marriages, it affects relationships. It's far more reaching than just a crime rate. So that's where we are, and I think as the gentleman from Scoville Circle, he's in Suna, that's what we're hearing about. We need more police staffing.
Good, thank you.
So I'm just west of Lincoln Square in California, Oregon, Illinois, High, Green. I've never met anybody who doesn't say more police would be good. I think that people mostly are concerned about the condition of other people's houses, that they're not kept up well, the trash, the big heaps of brush that collect somewhere. The tree falls with ice or lightning, whatever. They don't seem to know how to get rid of it, so it just kind of accumulates in yards. This hoarding situation is chronic. It's been going on for years, and I don't know how one really can address that. Some of the neighbors have said that complaints have been made and there was a little improvement, but it's like a person would have to go there weekly to address this. So a lot of the houses that in the 40-some years that I've lived in this neighborhood, have converted from home ownership to rental. So it makes it difficult to get neighborhood involvement. I mean, the students aren't all that interested and concerned and want to talk about anything neighborhood-wise. So that's it's critical mass kind of thing. Keeping the homes occupied by the owners is getting harder and harder, it seems, to do, because those properties get snatched up right away by realtors who realize that it's a lucrative area to rent in. So I don't know how to stop that process. It's probably unstoppable, but it's just kind of impacting then everything in the neighborhood when it's mostly students living in them.
Okay, Esther?
This isn't a direct answer to your question, but I just want to throw this out. this goes back to when I was on the city council, I'm talking over 20 years ago, was that when people get upset that they feel the police department's understaffed, there seems to be this spinning story that on the night shift, we only have 2 officers, which I know is not true. I mean, you can just come in there, there's more than 2 here, but people's perception, I think it would help, this doesn't, well, it'll help with addressing crime, obviously, but in terms of people understanding what's going on, I think it would really help if they got a clear explanation of how many people are on staff and what it means when you say patrol and whatnot. Because really, I mean, it's like, I mean, I think the line is there are only 2 officers on patrol at night, and what people imagine is the Andy Griffith Show and Mayberry, and there's Andy and Barney, and they're the only law enforcement officials in the whole township, and they're the ones doing it. And I know there's more than 2 officers out and about at night, but that's just something that has. It came recently, I don't remember if it was a leather paper or what, but it's something people are still saying, and I really think that it would be helpful to people. I mean, ultimately, people can't, the average person can't do an analysis of your staffing, other than that lovely article in the News Gazette that showed the chart of how we compare to every other city, or many other cities in the area. But there is, I think there's a false perception that we're even more understaffed than we are in Urbana, and so I think it would be helpful if that would be clarified.
Okay, thank you. I think that it will be discussed when we talk about adding more police, then we can talk about how many are on duty for every shift. So, this is pretty good timing. We're supposed to quit at 6:30, which it now is 6:30. And I hope that you all can come back in January 17th, same time. We'll have a city council meeting after that at 7, because we normally meet on Mondays, but Monday is a holiday, Martin Luther King. So thank you all for coming, and I
Mayor?
hope you'll come back with some suggestions about what the people that you deal with are concerned about and any possible remedies that they are thinking of. So thank you all for coming, and I'll adjourn the meeting now.